Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel, and welcome to the 2023 Lexus LS500h. The Lexus LS was the original model that launched Lexus into the world back in the late 80s with the LS400. But today in 2023, we have the flagship model that is hybrid. It did get a small update in 2023 on the inside. We're going to check that out. And we've never actually reviewed a hybrid model of the LS500h, so we're going to do that as well to see how is the flagship Lexus model doing in 2023 right after this. Let's start our technical review under the hood. Now, this car has a very unique hybrid system. Not like anything regular hybrids, not even like the single motor. We're going to dig into it and you'll find out how. Now, this hybrid system is only really used on this and the Lexus LC Hybrid. What lives under the hood is a V6, a very, very old school V6 with a little twist. So this is the 8GR FXS and sounds like a very fancy, unique, exclusive engine to this. But for lack of a better word, this is a 2GR FXS found in stuff like your Highlander Hybrid before they switched to the 4-cylinder, and many, many other models that had the V6 Hybrid toward the end of the 2GR cycle. It's exactly the same. So this is a super old school V6, so no turbo, no fanciness, nothing. It's an all aluminum engine. The cylinder head has a plastic valve cover, which is yet to have issues. Time will tell, I suppose. Two-piece cylinder head, very similar design to the 2GR. I mean, 2GR has been out since 2005. Very simple design for the cylinder head. Dual VVTi, variable valve timing. And this one does not have any of the newest electronically controlled variable valve timing. No, it's oil controlled on both banks. Has that very familiar valve in the front. Nothing really special about it. And then the fuel system in this engine is a D4S, so it has both direct and port injected. It's a pretty simple setup that has been proven. I do have a video where we investigated if this actually works for carbon buildup. It does. Here's that video if you want to check it out. But the other thing about this engine, which is kind of interesting, the cooling system is so basic. I mean, for a flagship sedan, this is the most basic. Even a Camry today has more complicated cooling system. This has such an ancient cooling system. It's so ancient that it has a mechanical water pump. And because we have the mechanical water pump, we have a drive belt, which is a Toyota Lexus unicorn. Toyota never really been into stretch belts, except with this engine and the 2GR FXS, which the hybrid variant of. This has a stretch belt, and it's such a unicorn stretch belt because usually you have some kind of a special tool to install it. Per the repair manual, to install and remove the stretch belt on this engine and the 2GR FXS, you use a shop rag. Put it between the belt and the pulley, spin the engine, it comes off, reverse that operation to install it. It's a very unicorn belt. I really don't like stretch belts, and this is the only engine that has a stretch belt from Toyota and Lexus. Now, this engine is, for lack of a better word, super reliable and super robust. Very simple. It looks very complicated with all these covers and everything, but this is basically your Camry Highlander normal car V6. It's a beautiful thing to find that in a flagship sedan. Yes, it's not exclusive, but this is the area where you want things to be nice and reliable and simple. It works 20 years ago and still works today. Let's dive into the hybrid system, because hybrid system in this thing is anything but conventional. Like we mentioned at the beginning, it's not like the standard hybrid system, nor is it like the newest hybrid system, the single motor like the Tundra and the Sequoia. This is kind of again, a unicorn hybrid system. It does have a lithium-ion battery. It's nominal voltage of 310.8. It does sit behind the back seat, which is an old school touch. It takes a lot of the trunk space. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about the exterior tour. But the other odds and ends about it. So the transmission is not an eCVT, but it is in a way. So here's how that transmission works. It has two motors, MG1, MG2, business as usual. MG1 starts the engine, charges the battery, and MG2 charges the battery and drives the car. But in between them, there's actually 3 planetary gear sets and clutches and bands to create a 4-speed transmission. It's a very interesting setup because if they would have put an ECVT in this, it probably would have worked, or better yet, put the new single motor setup. It would have worked even better. But they didn't. And this is something that's an old school. It goes back to the days of the LS500h. So 4 ratios. 2 are underdrive. Third gear, technically third gear, is direct drive, and the 4th gear is overdrive. And the hybrid system can engage these even with MG2 driving alone. That is pretty cool because sometimes you feel this car shift when you're in EV mode, and that is pretty cool. It's overcomplicated, very mysterious, because really not a lot of people know how to work on these. They do have a valve body, they do have solenoids, you gotta change that fluid on time, unlike regular hybrids. So that's the complication of this system. Works pretty good. There is no torque converter between the engine and transmission. So here's how this transmission is kind of constructed. First, at the very end, where it's connected to the engine, it has a dampener, just to kind of absorb some of the vibrations when the engine starts. Then you have a mechanical oil pump. Then you have MG1, which is directly connected to the engine. It starts it, and the engine then spins it to charge the battery. And then you have a front planetary gear set, and then you have MG2, then you have a center planetary gear set, and a rear planetary gear set. And these planetary gear sets, they all have clutches, they all have bands, and that's how you create the 4 ratios that this transmission have. And this transmission, in addition to the mechanical oil pump, it also has an electric oil pump. In case you are at slow speed or the engine is off and you need these shifts to happen, the electric oil pump takes over, because you need to apply some clutches and some bands to make the shifts happen. So if the engine is off, mechanical oil pump is no longer spinning, and that's how this happens. Now, MG1, this is where some similarities come back. MG1 starts the engine, so you do not have a starter, and then the inverter unit, which is the inverter with converter assembly, very similar to other hybrids. This is what sends power, takes power. This is what does everything. It's kind of the brain of the operation. It also have a DC to DC converter, so you don't have an alternator in this engine. That's what takes the high voltage from the battery, steps it down to charge the 12-volt battery, which in the Lexus LS has a special flagship flavor. It is enormous, and it sits right where you expect your spare tire to be. We'll look at that a little bit later in the video. Now, the truth have to be said about this system. It is mega complicated. This transmission is extremely complicated. And because it was only put in select cars, there's no real data of reliability. It's really difficult to tell, has this transmission have a lot of problems because it's in such low number of cars. So what I wish they would have done in some of these updates, especially now that we have the single motor hybrid system like in the Tundra and Sequoia, I wish they would have put the 10-speed that this normally comes with in the non-hybrid model and put the single motor system. I think it would have kind of updated this to give it a little bit more up and go, because this is a little bit underpowered in the hybrid model. But the good thing about this system, it is pretty efficient, does get good gas mileage, unlike the Tundra and Sequoia that doesn't exactly get good gas mileage. So I guess that is the compromise that they went with. But where things are very interesting is in the all-wheel drive setup. So this is an all-wheel drive setup, and we'll look at it when we put it up in the air. We'll look at a few things, but they decided not to go the conventional hybrid route of putting an electric motor that drives the other wheels, because this is a rear-wheel drive car with all-wheel drive in the front added to it, unlike many hybrids that are originally front-wheel drive with the rear-wheel drive. So what they did here is they put a mega complicated transfer case that sends power to the front to a differential that goes through the oil pan. Sound familiar? This is a design that Lexus loves to use. It is great until something happens, and then it's not great anymore. They love to put the axle that goes through the aluminum oil pan, and if you need to remove that axle one day, you are replacing the oil pan. Dissimilar metals, they love to use that design. It's great for compactness, and initially it's great. They don't have problems with, just like anything else. When one day you have a problem, things get very unpleasant. But I wish they would have done something flagship-like in the all-wheel drive system, maybe use a third motor or do something. But no, they just took the regular all-wheel drive from an LS and kind of made it work with the hybrid system. Now lastly, and this really doesn't have to do with stuff under the hood, some of the interesting technology in this car. So this is possibly the only thing that they did exclusive to this car, and something they've done in the past. Ever since the LS460 came out, they've been doing this without many people noticing. They've been experimenting with things on the low volume car flagship sedans, and usually that's okay, because this is what showcases their latest and greatest. And this car has advanced pre-collision system. Normally the pre-collision in most cars are now standard. Even if you buy a Corolla with hubcaps, it has standard pre-collision system. You have a radar sensor in the front. You're about to hit the car in front of you. It slams on the brakes. Very, very conventional. This, however, takes things to the next level. This does not have one, does not have two radar sensors. It have 5 radar sensors, because they are trying to kind of take this to the next level. So the front emblem one, that's just a standard one, same one for cruise control. But then you have one underneath it for kind of low objects approaching the vehicle. And then you have side ones and you have a rear one. The idea here is if somebody is trying to hit the car from the side, the system actually can detect that and it'll do something about it. That is pretty cool. However, the way they added it to this model, it is completely last minute and it completely looks off and doesn't really work as good as you'd hope it works. We'll talk about that when we look at the exterior. You'll see the location of it. And the other thing, although this is not exclusive to 2023, but it's something so interesting it's worth mentioning. If you look under the hood, especially in the front and around the hinges of the hood, you have these little canisters that have all kinds of scary warnings on them. These are actually mini airbags, or not airbags, but kind of a charge thing. The idea of this is when you hit a pedestrian, these will deploy to raise the hood in a way so the pedestrian will get hurt the least. Let's take a look underneath the Lexus LS, and starting with, of course, this is a flagship luxury sedan. Everything is covered up. They've always been everything covered up. But we look at the front, there are a few things that are interesting. First, because this is a V6, they put an opening right here for the oil filter, but there's something interesting about this oil filter. It's not a plastic housing oil filter. Usually this V6 comes with a plastic, canister style filter. This one is metal. That is pretty cool. And then you have another opening for the oil change. Pretty simple to service. Believe it or not, even though it's a very complicated flagship sedan, it's very simple to service. But then we pay our attention to the front suspension, which is typical LS front suspension with a few very interesting things about it. First of all, this has 2 lower control arms, 2 upper control arms, and then the knuckle. But the composition of things is what's interesting. This is steel, the rearward control arm, and so is the front one. Usually this was not always the case. This used to be aluminum, now it is steel. And that's where the strut sits on it. So the previous LS in the early years had a horrendous design where this ball joint was actually part of the knuckle. That was later remedied, and I'm glad that we continue this remedy here. You just have 3 bolts and one of the control arms, and then this comes out. Pretty simple to replace the ball joint. Very common for these suspensions that wear out early. You're not gonna get 200,000 miles out of these. That's just how they are. Then the interesting stuff is it still has an aluminum knuckle. Even the previous one did. That is pretty cool. 4-piston caliper, pretty standard for a car this big. But what is interesting, the backing plate is aluminum. It's not metal. That is pretty cool, especially in the rust belt area. They don't rust out as the car gets older. That is pretty cool. This does have air suspension, which you can see the massive shock here, air shock. Pretty cool setup. They are relatively reliable for what they are, but just like any air shock, eventually, we're gonna get to replace bill and things will be very expensive. As we walk our way back, you notice this, even though it's a V6, we have dual exhaust, and it's actually true dual exhaust. But before we get further into the exhaust, this is the hybrid transmission. and it is massive. And that's just how they've always done it. Even the LS600 was the same deal. This is the transfer case. So you notice the power comes this way, goes to the back, and then it turns around. There's actually another drive shaft here that goes to the front differential. It's pretty covered up. But then this axle comes out of this differential straight to the wheel. But this axle goes through the engine oil pan, and then it comes out that way. And the connection point where this axle connects to the oil pan, it has a bearing. Oil pan is aluminum, bearing is steel, and this is the never-ending story with Lexus and their lovely design over here. Really not a good design. I wish they would have done something better where the bearing bolts on so you can bolt it off and move on. No, when it gets seized, because they're dissimilar metals, you will have a festival to get this out. And the LS hybrid still have that same thing. But then as we walk around here, I mean, this is where the flagship comes up. And I really appreciate that Lexus really went that length. We look at stuff like this. So you have the heat shields, or they're actually very high quality heat shields. There is a huge insulator on the body. This is what contributes to how quiet this thing is. I mean, look at this very thick, very high quality insulation right in the tunnel, because this is the highest point. And there's so much noise here outside. This insulates everything. This is how these cars are quiet. Then as we move our way back, the exhaust kind of connects here, but it doesn't at the same time. You have this big brace right here. That is pretty, I mean, listen to that sound. That's the sound that makes us all car guys happy. The fuel tank actually lives in this area. It is a saddle fuel tank. It makes space for the drive shaft to pass through it and the exhaust. Pretty standard for cars like this to have this style fuel tank. But the exhaust is, just looking at it, such a high quality exhaust. All the welds. This is double wall exhaust, as Lexus have been using for a long time. And the interesting thing is, to put this brace, they have to make this bend up and then back down. It's such a beautiful sight. Usually Toyota and Lexus, their exhausts are very high quality, and this one is no exception, of course. Then when we come to all the way in the back, we have this massive rear end right here, rear differential. It is not aluminum and flimsy. This is steel, and not any steel. This is such a heavy duty rear end. Even the previous LSs, you go all the way to the original LS, they never really had rear end problems. Maybe a leak here and there, but otherwise, that's about it. Very simple service, drain and fill right here. I mean, things are very basic here. Rear suspension, historically on LSs, and this is no exception. This has a lot more aluminum than the previous generation. I mean, basically, every single arm except this one is aluminum, which is pretty interesting. They're trying to save some weight. But everything else looks very much Lexus LS business as usual. The rear suspensions usually on these, they're not known for a lot of problems unless you have extreme miles on them. This one, interestingly though, has a very, very long sway bar link. If you look at this sway bar link right here, it's extremely long and definitely longer than the previous generation. So this is a revised suspension, but it does have a similar look and feel, except it has more aluminum components. And even here, you have this big insulation panel right here. Dual exhaust, true dual mufflers. Even though this is a V6, they still went with it. They didn't really skimp and make one exhaust because it's a hybrid. No, they went all out. And looking here, and this is where, you know, we're going to talk about it more in the video where the LX lost its magic. But as a mechanic looking at this, this is every bit as much as an LS. I mean, the build quality here is unbelievable. You look at some of the other, you know, high flagship models, and they look so nice on the inside, but when you lift it up and look at it, it's like everything's cheap and flimsy. But here, this is the only part that they did not neglect on the LS. Maybe it's outdated, maybe it's not exclusive, but here, things are exclusive because the quality of everything you touch here and see is just unrivaled, and that remains exactly the same as the original LS400. Let's talk about the exterior of the 2023 Lexus LS. And the first thing is, this is a pretty good looking car. It's not over the top, but it does, the best way I describe it, it's a handsome looking car. Sophisticated, it's low key, but it's very good looking. The first thing is the spindle grille. And this is the little stuff that they made it exclusive. This is an interesting shape of the spindle grille. The only other car from Lexus that shares this exact shape is the LC500, which is another flagship coupe. I like it. It's not over the top. It's kind of fitting of this. Now, a little few things. This is a radar sensor. So is this one. This is part of that advanced package that we talked about, the kind of advanced pre-collision system. So you have two sensors in the front. The headlight design is pretty cool. It's actually very low key. Doesn't have really anything extravagant about it, but it just looks so sophisticated. Looks very nice. It's not over the top. I really like that. I think some of the newer headlights are getting a little over the top. This one is still somewhat on the classic side. But then we look at the design features of the hood. There's actually a lot going on, but it's not in your face. There is this line that comes in here and it creates this other plane that almost integrates into the spindle grille. That's, I thought, was a pretty cool design. And then there is this overall shape of this fender. It almost reminds us that it's a muscular shape. It kind of raises up and then it comes back down. I think that is pretty cool. What is not cool, however, is this thing. This looks like a complete and absolute afterthought. Completely looks out of place. They could have done a little bit of a design element here just to kind of hide it better. They didn't. This is the side radar sensor. This is what picks up if somebody's coming this way about to hit the car, so the pre-collision system can act. Same thing on that side. It completely looks out of place and doesn't fit. Doesn't look like it was there when they designed this car. And then we look at the side profile of this car, and for that matter, there is not much going on here. It's just a flat side. That's okay. That's what they decided to do. They could have done a little bit better. This is, again, the flagship sedan, not your everyday car. The doors are soft close, which is pretty cool. Very slow, however. I mean, it takes a while for it. If you go in some of the German ones, it's almost like immediate. You just sucks the door in and we're done. This one is a little bit on the not in a hurry. There we go. Then we go here, and this is where they have this little quarter glass with its own little shade, which we're going to talk about when we look at the inside. Interesting shape here because it kind of they try to mimic a coupe look, although this absolutely does not look like a coupe. But this body line kind of comes up and then it comes down at the end. As we go around the back, I think the back looks really exclusive, and even though it's somewhat shares similar design elements for other Lexus models, but it is exclusive to the LS, and that's how it should be with the flagship sedans. Taillights they have the L's kind of repeated in them, and then it has this downwards taillight that comes down for the turn signal. It is a pretty cool looking back end, and it's not over the top, but it is nice. And that's the whole point of this car. But what is not nice is the complete afterthought of the Formula One light right here. This is actually not a light. This is another radar sensor in the back. That's part of that advanced pre-collision system. They just decided to put it there. Looks completely out of place, but that's what they did. Let's talk about the trunk, which is historically with Lexus models extremely slow to open. Yeah, now it's open. Great. This is where things kind of fall off. You only have a button to close it, but you don't have a button to lock the car. Many other Lexus models now have that. Well, the LS doesn't, even though it's the flagship. And the trunk in the hybrid model is severely compromised by the hybrid battery being there. I wish they would have found a better place for it, like underneath the seat, like every other Lexus and Toyota model with a hybrid. But they decided to do that, and it literally kills half the space of your trunk. So if trunk space is a big thing, hybrid is not going to do it. And of course, being hybrid, it does not have a spare tire. Instead, you have a fuse block and the humongous German-style battery. Don't know why I need the battery this big, but there is a very, very, very large battery. This is probably, I'll go on record and say, this is the largest battery you will ever see in a Toyota hybrid product. Usually they have a tiny little battery because this doesn't start the engine. This just powers on the hybrid system and then it takes over from there. And there's something here that is very Lexus-like. I mean, the material here for the trunk, I mean, it's just a trunk. Nobody really, but even this Even the stuff you can't see, it's a very, very soft liner, which is pretty cool to see. And of course, the trunk takes a long time to close. Historically, this has always been the case with Lexus. Let's talk about the interior of the 2023 Lexus LS. Folks, the truth has to be said, this is a very, very nice place to be. I mean, from all the materials to all the fit finish to the design to the little stuff, this is very, very nice. And now it has been a little bit modernized. Long gone is the touchpad that we used to have right here. Now you have the latest infotainment screen that, you know, Lexus has been rolling out in other models. It is pretty capable, pretty featureful. Does have a few bugs here and there, but that comes with the territory of modern infotainment systems. But what is interesting is that they still have Grandpa's clock right here. This looked so nice in other models, but when we have a car that has many screens, this completely looks out of place, but they decided to keep it. And long gone is also your Grandpa's CD player. Many people seem to really be offended by that. Well, it's gone now. Even though if it was still here, it wouldn't have affected anybody. But instead of the trackpad that you used to have here, we have seat controls and steering wheel heater and the rear sunshade. Very interesting place. I love physical buttons, but I wish they would have just kept them where they were and put something else here, because this is now the centerpiece of your very high-end flagship luxury sedan is the heated seats and the buttons. That's what they did. That's okay. And this one being a hybrid, it has the, how should I say it? The Prius shifter. There's no other way to say it. This is who came out with this design. So basically, you push it to the side and down, you are in drive. You push it to the side and up, you're in reverse. You just push it down, you're in manual mode, even though this is a hybrid. Or you just push it and hold it to the side, it goes into neutral, and park is a physical button. Pretty interesting. It works pretty good. I wish it was a normal shifter, but at least it's some form of a normal shifter, not buttons or rotary dial. Now the gauge is a large screen, very fitting of a flagship luxury sedan, except it doesn't do much that a 2023 Camry XSE doesn't do. That's the problem. It doesn't really have anything exclusive to it. Basically, the entire screen, you can't customize anything except a little section on the side. You can change, you want to see the music or whatnot. This does have the optional heads-up display, which is huge and shows a lot of stuff. But I wish they would have done a little bit better with this screen. Make it something unique and exclusive. I mean, even the latest 2023 RAV4 has a better screen than the flagship luxury sedan. That is the problem. But then there's more stuff. So this has the Lexus's latest safety system with the driver monitor system. You got a little screen, looks like a screen, but it's actually infrared sensors that are always watching you in case you doze off or not look or you're not paying attention. But the side effect of that is it will constantly be beeping at you for one thing or another. Even if you're paying attention, even if you're driving well, it'll always be beeping at you, and you'll end up turning all these systems off because it's very annoying in this very quiet interior. And that's the reality of that. But then we move to the center console. I love how the center console opens from both sides, opens from this side, and opens from this side. That is very nice. But then most people that don't notice these buttons, when they get into this car, this is what they're going to do. There's a perfect opening here for you to put your hand, and that's what people think the opening is. Let's listen to the sound it makes when you do that. Feels like something broke. But actually, there's a little storage thingy here, just conveniently placed there. I don't know what exactly are we going to store in this tiny thing. Coins in a $114,000 luxury sedan? Perhaps. But then there's something better. There is a place here for you to take your cell phone and put it right here, and it just magically disappears. I love this. But what I don't love about it is this is the problem with this sedan. There are so many things that, wait, is this like that? No, it's not. Well, why couldn't they make it like that? Exactly. Why is the wireless charger not here? This would have been the coolest thing ever. You take your phone, you put it here, it's out of your view, and it is charging. While they didn't do that. It is beyond me why they didn't do that, but they didn't do that. But let's talk a little bit about how is this interior like to live with. The first thing is, even though you have a modern infotainment system which has a lot of customizations and some of the seat functions are actually exclusive to the screen, which is okay, but your basic controls are still here. Your HVAC controls right in front of you. Very easy to access, very easy to use. And so is your volume knob, your the standard radio, media, seek, track, whatnot. It's all right in front of you. So is your brake hold. So is basically all the controls you're going to be using every day. And this is what makes this interior easy. You sit in this, it's a comfortable place to be, although not very smooth. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's a very comfortable place to be. This very, very nice materials and fit and finish. And then it's easy to operate. That has been always a Lexus LS special, because you get into some of these flagship cars, it takes you more than 5 minutes to figure out, okay, I just want to change the temperature. How do I do this? Let me pull out my master's degree. This does not have that. It's just basic, and that is cool. But then there are small stuff, even though this is not exclusive to the 23, but they are definitely honorable mentions since this came out in 2018. First thing is, these lines that run across the dash, they just look so nice. And what's even more nice about them, when you change the vent direction, it does not change the orientation of this line. They built the vent behind these lines, so now wherever you put your vent, these lines are always perfectly lined up and they look very nice. And the other thing is, this floating kind of handle of the door, it just looks so nice. And the way the light reflects behind it, it's not over the top, but it's a small touch that gives this car super exclusive feel. I really like it. There's a lot of little things in this car interior that were not really updated. They're there from day one when they made this model in 2018, but they're still every bit as nice in 2023. Let's talk about the back seat of the Lexus LS, because really this is a very important place in a sedan like this. Now, this doesn't have the top executive package where there's an ottoman that comes up and all this stuff, but even though it doesn't have it, there is a lot to be said about this place. First, this is my driving position. I am 5'7". I mean, of course, this is a long sedan and that is what it's meant to be. But there is one thing that is nice and a disappointment. This is super nice leather. Same that super soft semi-aniline leather that they used. And there's a little piece of wood right here that complements this area, not make it just the back seat that is boring. But then underneath it, this is cheapo leather, so is this one. You know, when you have somewhat of an executive package in the back, the important person is going to sit in the back. This is not nice to look at. That's okay. But they make it up by giving you a little mirror to look at yourself. This is hardly exclusive here because every single luxury sedan will have that. But then you have 2 speakers here and 2 speakers in the front on the roof. That is pretty interesting location for a speaker. And then you have 2 vents, 1 vent here, 1 vent here. That is pretty cool. And another Lexus LS special. The handles are wrapped and cushioned with leather. That is pretty cool. But the highlight of this entire interior is right here. You have a little screen where you can control everything. Like, I want my shade to go away. Goodbye shade. You just press it in the screen and it goes away. But the coolest thing about the shade is, it has to be said, it's every luxury sedan. It closes this one and this one, even that little quarter glass in the back. Even that has this very cute little shade. But then we go to the seats. Of course, you can control the passenger seat from here. You just want it to go away and kind of disappear. Because once that happens, you can do this. You can recline your seat. Doesn't have the ottoman, unfortunately, but hey, we can live with that. But wait, there is more. You can even control the headrest. If you want it to stick out, kind of go up and down. That is pretty cool. Makes it very comfortable on long trips. However, the truth have to be said. The times of chauffeur-driven kind of people are kind of dying because even rich folks like to drive themselves these days. It's just the way things are. So, at least in the United States, this is not very hot commodity. So you'll notice most of these LSs won't have this option because this option is ridiculous. Truth have to be said, very expensive is ridiculous in this case. From the screen, you can control pretty much everything. Climate control, audio, you know, all the various shades and whatnot, which is pretty cool and something you expect in a car like this. But there's one more interesting thing. Remember the front center console that opens for both sides? Well, this one also has buttons on either side, but it just opens like that. I can understand why that is. Maybe they didn't want to put the handle here, but I wish this one also opened on both sides. That would have been pretty cool, but it doesn't. Everything here is super nice. You still have this very nice design here. You do have this floating handle. I love being here. This is a very comfortable place to be, of course. But then there is one small thing. If we put the seat back so you guys can see it, put the seat back to its position, normal position, back to planet Earth. When we put this up, technically, this is a 3-passenger seat. But if you were the unlucky, unfortunate person that have to sit here, it is horrendous to sit in the middle. Just keep that in mind as you buy one of these. You think, oh, I'll get the medium executive package that doesn't have everything but have something. Don't do that, because whoever sits here, their head will be planted on the roof of the car, and then this hump is enormous. You're going to intrude on both passengers. So if you're buying one of these and you have kids and you're thinking maybe they're adult kids and you're thinking, oh, there I have 3 kids, we'll be perfectly fine. You won't. Just heads up on this one. Let's talk about some things I do not like about the 2023 Lexus LS. And it starts with this. Usually, the flagship model of a brand is the way for the brand to show their latest tech, their top future features that you will eventually see in their lesser models. And it's supposed to really wow you, and that wow factor usually comes at a very hefty price that only a few can afford, but that's the point of the flagship. It's the best of what we have that you will eventually see trickle down. But in the case of the LS, it has that hefty price, but it hardly wows you after spending 15-20 minutes in it. The first thing is it lacks exclusivity. Other than the massaging seats and some odds and ends here and there, basically all the options that it has, every other Lexus model has, some of them unfortunately better. That's the first problem. The second problem is, as smooth as this car is, and if you compare it to other Lexus models, it is ultra smooth. But when you compare it to other models in this segment, the high-end flagship luxury sedan, it's not smooth. And this goes with Lexus's relentless pursuit of ruining rides to make them sporty, which they are not. This is not even the F Sport model. You go drive it over small bumps, it's jarring. For an LS, if you've driven an old LS and seen how smooth they are compared to everything else, even when they get old, even our 600,000-mile Lexus that we're building on the channel is smoother than this. And that is a statement to be aware of. Compared to other models, this starts to fall short. It does not have the exclusivity that the flagship should have, and that is the only reason you should be buying a flagship sedan. Exclusivity. And this one doesn't have it. So should you buy a Lexus LS in 2023? Folks, the truth have to be said. Unfortunately, the Lexus LS that once shook the world of flagship large sedans is a fading memory in 2023. I mean, as nice as this car is, for someone who's never been in an LS or perhaps never been in a large flagship sedan, this will be extremely impressive. Super nice fit and finish, super nice materials, very nice design, very easy to operate, very simple, not overcomplicated and kind of overdone. It is very gentle and subtle and easy to operate. However, if you've been in another Lexus LS models, specifically the LS400 and the LS430, and to a point, the LS460, this will feel lacking. It is lacking the magic of the flagship. It doesn't have that tank feel that the older ones did. Yes, the LS460 did not have that full-on tank feel, but still, it was better. This feels like a large ES, like a large GS. Unfortunately, it lacks that magic, and that is the core problem with this car. However, there's one thing to be said about this. In the higher trims, this absolutely makes no sense because now it lacks a lot of technology, a lot of that wow factor of the flagship sedan. But at the lower trims and the price level that it is at, it is a lot of car for less than $100,000, right around $80,000 range. It is a lot of car, and the best part about this car is it doesn't drop a lot of options. You can option it out a little bit and still get all the cool features without having to be over a $100,000 car. And that is where this still makes sense. But the truth have to be said, this doesn't feel like they still care about the LS. It lacks so many things. There are so many whys. And initially, when you open the door and step in it, it feels like the nicest thing in the planet. It feels every bit like the old LSs. But then when you spend 5 and 10 and 15 minutes looking around, is when you start asking yourself, well, why couldn't they do this like that? Why couldn't they do this like that? And it just dawns on you that they're not interested in this anymore. This launched them into the world, and now this is just a fading memory. They're moving on, just like the market is moving on from sedans. That is the God-honest truth, folks. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.